Welcome everybody to Botanical Art Worldwide Q&A webinar. My name's Elaine Allison and I'm President of the Association of Botanical Artists, or ABA. ABA is coordinating the British Steering Committee for Botanical Art Worldwide in collaboration with representatives from Society of Botanical Artists, the Wales Society of Botanical Illustrators, the Eden Project Florilegium Society, and the Birmingham Society of Botanical Artists. Together, we're coordinating the British entry into the Botanical Art Worldwide Exhibition 2025. The British exhibition is called Looking Back for Our Future. It will be held in the Royal Society of Birmingham Artists, so the RSBA, their gallery in May 2025, but also will be online. If you go to our website on our homepage, that's the Association of British Botanical Artists homepage, you will be able to find all the details and artist information pack for the British 2025 exhibition. But tonight, we're fortunate to have one of the lead organisers of Botanical Art Worldwide from America, Carol Woodin. Carol is an experienced, award-winning botanical artist with artwork in major collections around the world. Welcome, Carol. And Carol will tonight be in conversation with Martin Allen, with another well-respected botanical artist and a trustee of the Association of Botanical Artists charity. So without further ado, I shall hand over to Martin.
That's great. Thank you very much, Elaine. And so basically what we're going to do for this hour or so is me and Carol are just going to chat about stuff, but all about the Botanical Art Worldwide exhibition. And some people have already sent in questions, so I'm hopefully going to slot them into the conversation so that it fits in quite nicely. And I think what we'll start with, Carol, is we'll start with just the basics about the Botanical Art Worldwide 2025 exhibition and what that's going to entail and what it's going to mean.
Well, Botanical Art Worldwide 2025 is, of course, many of you know, the second iteration of the Botanical Art Worldwide project. The theme for this exhibition is crop diversity. It's a little bit difficult for people to understand and all the kind of nuances of it. So we'll be talking a little bit more about that later on. But what I'd like to do is kind of give you the basic outline by showing you the Botanical Art Worldwide website homepage, which is a website that each country will have access to. Is it showing?
Yep, that's showing on mine.
Great. Okay, so botanicalartworldwide.info is a website that we maintained for the first Botanical Art Worldwide exhibition in 2018. And all of that information from that previous project is still on the page. You may recognize some of your members here. But we have updated limited parts of it. The first thing that we've done is describe the project and then the eligible subjects, which you also have on the ABBA website, a good description of the accepted subjects that are eligible. So
we're actually going to be spending quite a bit of time later in this, just talking about those subjects and talking around how we would choose those subjects. So, sorry, Carol.
And that has to be mostly what artists are personally interested in.
Sure.
The project is run by a steering committee, and each country nominates one person from their committee that's organizing the project, and then that person joins the steering committee, and we make all our decisions by vote in the steering committee. So there are going to be both virtual and some live exhibitions, and then events are going to be held on the Worldwide Day of Botanical Art, May 18th, 2025. And each country that participates has an option of updating their information on their country page. And this is our country page for the upcoming exhibition. We know our venue. We don't have any artworks chosen yet, but we have general information for the call for entries.
And
So each
I'll
country.
just pop in onto that. So each country there, we're still missing a lot of the updated stuff from countries. So if anyone's listening from different countries, can you please send in your information to Jodie? And that includes us for the British contingent as well. So.
And that is her email address is worldwide@asba-art.org. And those of you on the steering committee do have that information. And then as time goes by, we will add events. We'll have a general site for slideshows here. And then if people publish actual catalogs, we'll have a link through so people can buy them there. And pretty soon we are hoping to produce a document with all these agreed to guidelines that all the decisions that the steering committee has made in a single document. So every country would have a copy of that.
And so basically when we're looking at the exhibition, there's then this set of central guidelines with which each country is complying to make us so that we join together, and it makes sense when we all join together for the worldwide day. But within that, then each country has a flexibility, presumably, to do what is appropriate for their country.
Yes, and that's part of the fun of the exhibition, is to see the different takes on it that each country has. Their botanical wealth is often quite different around the world, and that was one of the most exciting things. I think Martin will agree.
Yeah, I mean, we're gonna really go for that later. Yeah, so I mean, no, I mean, in terms of the way that I was thinking, in terms of the way that the exhibition is organized. So, for example, so if I talk about the way that we're looking at doing this for the British exhibition, and so what we're looking to choose is, and I think every country is going to choose 40 works as an example of their country. So these 40 works then go forward, is that right, to make the 40 works make an exhibition from each country, and then that all those 40 works then join up, and we get, I think the first time we had a digital, like a slideshow that just ran through country after country. And that's the point. I mean, I was chatting to you about this yesterday, saying how when I saw that, I felt that was actually quite emotional, because you not only get to see what everyone else is doing, but you get a flavor of each area of the world, each area, each country, and what they're trying to say about their country as a way, and I felt that was one of those ways in which it felt like we were literally coming together, even though we're also separate. But I mean, now with the digital age, everything's more close. But I felt that, and I was. You'd be amazed as well at the difference in seeing the difference of countries' styles in the way that different countries portray their plants. But also, I mean, from my point of view, the tropical countries, they're much more exuberant plants and much brighter and much bigger, and British plants all tend to be a bit like, ooh, and a bit sort of uptight and everything. That's probably our national character or something. But that was a really good thing to see. So each country is then going to pick 40 or select somehow these 40 paintings, yes, according to the guidelines that we have. So
and if it kind of goes by the guidelines that you accept in your botanical art organization, if you have one.
Mm-hmm.
But we do want original artworks of plants that are botanical artworks.
Mm-hmm.
So, flower paintings, we don't really accept, but if they're botanically correct, then
Sure.
they would fit.
Sure.
Other than that, we don't have any restrictions to size or any way you want to run your show. In fact, if it's a physical show, you can have as many artworks in it as you like. The digital show, though, however, is limited to 40
Yeah,
images, so you'd have to
the
choose 40.
digital one, that is the worldwide one that you're collating, and that will go to each country as well, so everyone can share in that space, in that thing, is those 40 selected images from each country. Yeah, so I mean, in terms of that, that's what everyone will be doing. So the British exhibition, what we're going to be doing is, because we're doing a physical exhibition, we're going to have those 40 juried artworks hung in the exhibition, the Birmingham Gallery. And then, because we've got a bit of space, we think we've probably got room for about approximately 20 more at that gallery. So we'll be able to have those, you know, the best ones that we've chosen that fit the criteria, that explain what we want to explain as an exhibition, which we'll go into a bit later. And then we're going to have hopefully another 20 more. And then also, because of the way that ABBA works as a society, we're going to also have our own separate little British digital exhibition, which shows what everyone put in. Because, you know, we want to encourage what everyone is. We want to encourage everyone at every ability to join in. So we're going to do it like that. But that's not the case all exhibits. Elaine, you're coming back.
I'm popping back in. Martin, can you remind people that there's the Q&A for people to put in there?
Yes.
And also Renata's got her hand up. So I think Renata's got a question. But
I
Renata, can you put that through the Q&A, please? Can you type that in? Because otherwise Martin can't see it. Thank you.
Okay. Yes. If you...
I shall disappear again.
Thank you. Yes, if you want to ask a question as we're going along, I've got some questions that we've been handed that were emailed in. If you want to ask a question from earlier on, then if you type it into the box where it says Q&A, that then pops up on my screen. And if I don't notice it, Elaine pops up and reminds me, which is very good. We work as a team. It's very good. So that's the way that ours is going to do that, but every country is going to be different. And I know we've had some questions in. So I know some countries, thank you to Natalia who wrote in, and some countries are not on the list of participating countries yet, and people have been asking. It's then a case of, you know, what do I do next? How do I go about that? So suggestions?
Yeah, in general, we've had a few more countries that are exploring the idea. They're pretty excited about the possibility of participating. And so what they're doing in their individual countries is trying to put together a team and then beginning to think about how they would manage their shows. Many of the countries that don't have botanical arts organizations yet are considering founding some, and also considering mainly a virtual exhibition. So we do have more countries, and the best thing to do is to look at the website and then email Jody Williams, who's doing most of the administrative work. And we'll put this in the Q&A, or in the chat, I guess. We'll put this in the chat. It's her email address is worldwide@asba-art.org, and she can give you specifics.
And I think as well, so some people are maybe perhaps for whatever reason currently in exile, and so it may be that you could work with the country from which you are in exile at the moment if they're putting on a show. One of the things to bear in mind, though, is that your image that you're choosing, again, which we'll talk about, it should be appropriate to the country in which you're exhibiting. And I think that's going to be a key thing. So I'm also got a question related to, I'm not going to say this right, apologies, Malavika, who is writing from India, just talking about some of the, I think we've emailed her, but just talking about what they can do and how they can go about it. Basically, you've got the main bit is to choose 40 works that we're going to, and then after that, you can do what you want. Is that right?
Essentially, you can run your exhibition whatever way you want, And if you do a virtual exhibition, we will come up with guidelines and standards and a template and a deadline for all that. And that won't be until probably sometime around the end of 2024, early 2025. So that is a timeline you're looking at to get your artists working on the subjects and then submit them so that they can be selected in some way. If you jury them in or have a selection team to choose those 40 artworks.
Yeah, and I think it's very important to be aware that different countries have different resources available, and obviously virtually everyone's going to be a volunteer, and so that's a lot of time to work on. So thank you very much for that. And I think everyone who wrote in, I think we're writing to you individually as well. That's correct. Yes, just to check in. I am checking my Q&A. So hello to Jenny in Ecuador. Carol's busy typing an answer. This is good. Okay. Try again, I think. And Renata, Elaine is typing you an answer for the email address, I feel. Is that correct? Thank you very much. Okay. So we're good on that. So that covers our process and what you're going to do. I think it's probably a good idea then to move on to sort of the main part of the exhibition, which is to talk about the subjects and how we can choose our subjects. And I think what's quite important in terms of choosing a subject is to hear from you the why, the reasons for choosing the subjects, because I think that really helps in terms of what subject you want to do. So do you want to, I think you've got a slideshow.
Yeah.
That we're going to talk around.
This one. Yeah, so the crop diversity theme revolves around three main categories of plants. And why we're talking about crop diversity is because we're losing crop diversity in our food plants, just in the same way we're losing diversity in our wild plants. So, and people are thinking about food security and climate change going forward. So the three categories for that, and we'll talk, Martin and I will go into, we'll use examples to talk about each of these kinds of crops: heritage crops, crop wild relatives, and ancient crops. And the images that we're going to use are from our show. We've done a crop diversity show, and we have just been so thrilled with the way it's been received, and also just the depth of stories behind the works in the show that artists really dug in and learned a lot and met interesting people and kind of enriched everybody's life by participating in the project. And the show is still on view at Oak Spring Garden Foundation through October 30th in Virginia. So the first one I wanted to talk about, and Martin probably recognizes this work. This is a painting that Lizzie Sanders did, and I just always think it's such a good description of why crop diversity is important. And this is a project that the Edinburgh Botanical Garden did a few years back to recreate what's called the Edinburgh potato. And the Edinburgh potato dates to around the beginning of the 1900s, I believe. And I think that there were some versions of it floating around in the late 1800s. But what had happened, as you all know, is the potato blight occurred. And the blight was affecting cultivated potatoes, and to the point of devastating consequences. So what happened is potato breeders reached back into wild plants, and there are many, many wild Solanum potato species in Central and South America, in Mexico. And this Solanum demissum is from Mexico. It's the potato on the right. This is the wild relative. And then this is, of course, the cultivated potato that we know and love. And they hybridize the two. And because that Solanum demissum has been living in the wild, since the beginning of time, essentially, it has picked up some resistance to blight. And so when it's hybridized with this potato, it brings that resistance along. And then each subsequent generation brings some of that genetic information along and helps protect it against blight. So had this wild relative been wiped out in the wild, we would not have had access to that plant to save the cultivated potato. So that's why we talk about the lack of diversity in some of our major crops and the benefit that we have by using a broader diversity and then resourcing wild crops in order to increase that diversity.
But what's really interesting about this painting is that all that you've just said results from that image. And it's such a clever image because it shows you so much. You can see very clearly the diversity just in one go. You don't have to know, you can see the size of the tubers, that they're relatively, you can see that the flower sizes are different. You can see that the fruit shapes are different on the fruits, and she's included all those things. There's also different stem color. But the interesting thing, I think, from that, and I think that's going to be a theme, I hope, from the images that people send in to exhibitions, is that we've got here someone who's very skillfully using their artistic, their artistic range, their artistic skill, all the things that you know as an artist, and they're telling a story, or they're starting the conversation on that. And I think that's such a clever painting. It's such a clever subject. And from my point of view, I always think that a huge amount of your painting is the choice of your subject. So it's the thought that goes into what you're actually going to paint. It's one thing to learn all the skills, but then you have to make it engage. There's no point having a painting that no one wants to look at. So excellent, really excellent example from the late Lizzie Saunders, sadly. But and a superb painting, do you know?
I have to say, it's a stunning painting in life. And when I read about the history of this plant and started digging into it, I was just in complete awe, and I learned so much. So all of that is contained in this.
Yeah, I mean, so much applause for that.
So one thing I wanted to mention is that even though a crop may be considered heirloom or heritage because it has been around over 50 years, not every crop is kind of applicable to this show.
Appropriate.
Yes,
yeah.
Appropriate. And this is a good example of that. This Granny Smith apple dates to 1868, but now it is one of the top 10 apples grown around the world. So it is the tart green apple that everyone turns to, and they're grown on nearly every continent. So we would instead be looking for an apple like the one that Denise Walser-Kolar has painted here, the Roxbury Russet. And this was in Jefferson's garden at Monticello. So it dates to the 1700s, and people believe that it may be a sport of the English russet. So it probably does go back quite a bit further. And that is not widely grown anymore because of the way the skin develops at russeting, and it's not popular in the supermarket. You want a nice shiny apple in the supermarket. So it's falling out of favor. And this is a good candidate for the show.
Yeah, so that's an interesting thing in that I think as an artist, you have to bear in mind that when you're thinking of your entry and what you're going to send in, there's going to be other people sending stuff in as well. And so you get to the point where it's going to be juried. And so the jury, you know, the people choosing, the selection committee choosing, are going to want to create an interesting exhibition. And they're going to want to create something that represents their country. So we're looking at representing Britain. So in Britain, we have a lot of different apples to choose from. So that could be quite a popular choice for people. So if you're thinking of doing an apple, you've then got that issue of, if it's going to be popular, how do you make your apple the one that the jury want to choose, you know, that the selection committee choose? You really have to think about that. It's not as easy as just, I'll paint an apple, you know, an apple with a better story. You know, if you've got an apple that tells a really interesting, clever story, then that's better. If you've got a clever way of showing, and I think we've got an image later on that's a very clever way of showing a plant that you think you know, and in the same way that Denise is showing us a way of looking at the apple that we wouldn't normally see. It's not a textbook way of looking at an apple illustration, is it? You know, there's not the textbook way of flowers. It's somehow more interesting because it's on vellum. So, you know, that's saying extra things as from artistic things. But I mean, that's a really good point. There's a lot, I think, in Britain in terms of apples, and those countries, again, like America, where there's heavy British influence, will have a range of apple crops. I think I'm hoping we're going to see different countries doing different fruits. Right, next one.
And this is an example of what Martin was just talking about. You know, the squash, cucurbits, originated in the Americas, and then they have moved around the world, and they've moved around the world very early. So these three artists from three different countries, one in Canada, one in India, and one in Japan, have shown some of the diversity in their countries. And when these squashes move to each country, and if they're isolated there for like Akiko Inokido's Shishigatani Kaboka pumpkin, that's been cultivated to remain consistent for 200 years. It's hand pollinated, then it's netted so nothing else gets in there. So the diversity in that pumpkin will be different than the one that Damodar has painted in India and that Sangmani has painted in Canada.
And also, sorry, go on.
No, you go ahead. I know.
I was going to say also, just from the point of view of from the artistic point of view, thinking about how each artist has presented those images. So we've got diverse shapes of the actual subject itself, even though it's effectively the same subject, if you like. But they've also presented it in different ways. And from the point of view of someone viewing an exhibition, that makes it so much more exciting. You know, because we've got Akiko doing those wonderful leaves, we've got the flower in there, we've got pencil work on the flowers. We've got a straightforward, this is a superb painting of the fruit, the pumpkin. And then we've got a really clever artistic way of showing what it's like when the pumpkin is ripe, you know, with all the dead bits and all the rest of it, and that and cut in half, showing you the inside. And I think that selection is thrilling to see as a way of demonstrating our sort of collective skill as artists. I think that's a really lovely slide to see, and hopefully that is something to bear in mind for people. Everyone has their own different ways of doing things, and you've got to think of a way that suits your style, and choose a subject that suits your style. And then please, if you can come up with things like that, it's going to be a joy.
and speaking of a joy, I just have to show this painting because I think it's just such a beautiful tour de force collection of various cultivars of eggplant, and they've almost all been created over time by human intervention. So through human hybridizing and crossbreeding and selecting, we have all these different colors of eggplant, all the different shapes and sizes. And Jean accessed these in a number of ways. Some of these she grew herself. Some of these she found at a farmer's market. Some of these she found at a local farm. And then as she was putting the composition together, she decided that she needed orange in the composition. And she started to seek out an orange eggplant. And it was October. She went to her local Asian market and they were selling these little orange eggplants as pumpkin on a stick. But they were clearly eggplants. And it turns out that so now we have all these hybrid eggplants along with a wild species from Africa, Solanum ethiopicum. So it's not only visually so enriching and so enjoyable to look around and just examine each of these sort of mother of pearl surfaces, but it also is informative in that all of these came from probably something that looks somewhat like this at one time.
Yeah, I mean, an incredibly clever choice of subject. I know the choice of subject is there, and you can see that this is something that Jean is excelling in, looking at that reflection, looking at that surface. And also, I mean, this is something I wouldn't attempt, because I find many different objects in a painting really difficult. I'm not. It's not a forte of mine, that of composition. I find that very difficult to place. I would find that very difficult to do. My approach would probably to put them all in a nice neat line or something, you know, and do it that way. But that's what's really good about choosing an approach that works for you. So Jean has not only got a very clever choice of subject, because look at that diversity in shape and in form, but we're still talking about the same species there on the whole. But she's also, again, chosen something that she can excel at, which is the composition. That splendidly, you know, I mean, your eye, you go straight in at that large, the dark. I was going to say black, but I mean, it's not black the way she's painted it. Aubergine first, and then your eye moves around the picture, so you've got a great focal point, and then you're moving around. But also, being Jean, she's stamped her own foot on it, her own personality, her own way of painting. You know, you can spot a Jean Emmons, can't you? So, which is very, very tricky to do, and so very good. So yes, I think this is a really good way of doing a celebration of diversity. And I think there are lots of crops and fruits that lend themselves to this. There's very much apples, which we've just talked about, lends itself to this. Things like, thinking in Britain, things like plums, green gages, all those sorts of things would lend themselves to this sort of clever arrangement. Yeah, but wow. This must have been such a good exhibition, Carol, in real life to see.
It is very edifying to look at.
Yeah.
Each venue has hung it differently. And at Oak Spring, they've got a lot of their own collection on display too, that's related to crops.
That's good.
So, you know, old books and paintings, it's remarkable to see them all together. So this is another example of a heritage crop, and I do want to sort of mention how the artists find their subjects. And this artist just went to her local farmer's market and found these Jimmy Nardello sweet peppers. And then, she got them home and she thought, oh, these would be fun to paint, and started to look into the history of them, and ended up becoming in contact with Jimmy Nardello's and descendants, his family. So she got to know them. They came to see the show. So it just opened up more doors for her than just grabbing a subject and painting it. And people do love this painting on the wall.
And this is another thing that you when you're talking about these paintings that have been chosen, those stories behind the actual paintings. So there's not just a story behind the actual plant, there's a story behind the painting as well. So it's like double stories every time. And I think, I mean, that's certainly what we're aiming for the British exhibition, and I hope everyone else is going to aim for this, because I think that level of depth behind the artwork really makes it worthwhile, more worthwhile, the painting and the time and the effort that artists are going to put into creating the work. We did an exhibition at the SBA called Reflections, where we talked about carbon and global warming and stuff like that. And it was, how do you relate that? How do you, as an artist, as a botanical artist particularly, how do you find a way of showing an image that adds to that story, that adds to the conversation that we all need to be discussing? And this, I mean, this is, again, is a perfect example, because, if you can meet the person and the family and as well as, I mean, we do the art like that. Just a point as well about the composition there. You'll notice that they're not all ripe, and adding the green into that composition makes the red really stand out. And so that's a very clever, thoughtful way of making a more interesting painting, I think, which I think, generally you tend to do those sorts of things when you're more experienced. But very good. We've got next.
Yeah, and I do want to mention one more thing.
Mm.
Artists often have a hard time with the idea of how are they going to come up with the cultivar name? How are they going to know if it's heritage or not?
Sure.
And that can be difficult, but one of the best ways to do it is either some of the artists have worked with botanical gardens, some have worked directly with farmers, some have grown the things themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And in this case, she worked, she went to the farmer's market, found out that they were Jimmy Nardello peppers. And Jimmy Nardello peppers have become quite popular now, but they were almost at the risk of being lost. The Seed Savers Exchange saved them, and I actually was able to buy some in my local farmer's market. So often, if you have contact with the farmer, or say the person at the farm stand, they can tell you what cultivar you're dealing with. And also other kinds of orchards, they'll tell you what kind of cultivar you are looking at.
Sure. I mean, I think the issue of the cultivar is we're talking about a painting that is telling a story. And so if you've got that story behind it, often the cultivar is part of that story. If for example, that your apple is pineapple, Pitmarston pineapple, then that tells you a story, because you then go back to the person that named it, why they named it, what the flavors are involved, and all those sorts of issues. Now, I think Jenny's got a question here where she says, some of the plant material will come from home gardens where people will not know the variety. Now, we've got a thing, if you can say that the person has saved their own seed, you know, and it's maybe if you've got a story where it comes from within the family or from within someone's family, like someone's grandma grew it, passed it on, and you can explain that, then that makes part of the story. There are bound to be places, particularly in tropical countries, where people are going to be growing a lot more, perhaps in their gardens, like a small holding, where they're not going to know the variety, you're not going to know what it is. But if it's been something that is indigenous to the area, or is something that is you only see in that sort of village, or you only see in that sort of town, you're not likely to see it at a supermarket or somewhere like that, and you can explain that and justify that, then I think that's going to be more acceptable as a way of doing it. Do you agree there, Carol? Is that a...
Yeah, and I have an example of something like that in my own painting that we'll get to. So
okay, so we'll get to that. And then I've got a question there from Parish. I don't know, I actually don't quite understand the question, because I don't know what a GI tag is. Anything, Carol? So if Parish, if you can add a bit more to explain what GI, a GI tag is, that will help us, and I'll come back to that.
yeah.
So hopefully that's okay for Jenny. I do think if you're doing something, it helps to have the cultivar name if you have it. You know, because that's part of the story, isn't it? If there isn't a cultivar name, then that could also be part of the story.
Right. And we do have a few examples of that we can provide today. So, and this one is a named variety. This was brought to the US in the 1600s by Spanish missionaries. And there's a project in Tucson to preserve and keep these cultivars alive. So this was grown from a graft off of an ancient tree in the Southwest, and it's pretty surprising that they're growing fruit like this in Arizona, but it's a good example of a different medium that helps to kind of broaden out the look of the show.
Yeah, it's interesting to see ink shown, because again, this is back to, if you're putting together an exhibition, you're looking for a varied set of images for people to look at. So, and there are always fewer people doing ink, so good thing to bear in mind.
So now we're going to move into the crop wild relative category. And these are wild species that can be hybridized with cultivated crops to impart a new characteristic to the cultivated crop. We talked a little bit about that with Lizzie's potatoes. And the Crop Trust says that more than a third of wild fruit and veg relatives require urgent conservation. And this is a fig that Uniki Negroho painted. And she painted it because, first of all, it is a wild relative to the cultivated fig. It's very useful. She painted it for a project about the diet of the silvery gibbon. And this is apparently its favorite food. And she tells a little bit more of a story in here too, with these, I don't know if you can see these tiny little dots. These are the life-size wasps. And then this is an enlarged wasp, to tell the story of how this fruit is formed by the wasps that drill into it, just like with all figs.
I think that's a really good thing, because that's not just showing the actual species, that's telling us a little bit about its interdependence on a particular wasp to do that pollination. So it's a bit of starting like a food web, isn't it? You know, a food way of saying, you know, you need this. Again, I'm hoping that what we're going to see is this sort of variation when we look at the worldwide slideshow, and different countries will be seeing things that we've not, that are going to surprise us, that are going to surprise people from other countries. And that's, again, lovely.
Yeah, and what I will say is that for the worldwide show, we have a general agreement among countries that it doesn't matter where the crop came from originally, as long as it's grown in your country now. So a lot of these plants that were in our Abundant Future show would not be eligible for our show this time, because we'll be limited to our country's boundaries for what is grown or found here. So
for example, you showed at the start the potato. Now, obviously, potato is South American, so you wouldn't normally think about them in terms of perhaps a Scottish show. But the actual reason that they were there, and the fact that it had, I think Edinense was the name for it, makes it Scottish, is what you're saying, and so that makes it includable, or more appropriate, shall we say, for a Scottish exhibition.
Yeah, and all these crops have come from somewhere and they've ended up somewhere else, and they become very, very important where they've ended up. So that is part of the story that we're telling. And then I've got another example of crop wild relative here, a couple more examples. Liz Shipham's blackthorn, which you probably are all familiar with, and then the wild fox grapes. And I wanted to put these next to each other because of Martin's look at the entire show. They're quite different stylistically, and they each tell a different story.
And yet pretty much the actual fruit itself is virtually the same shape, and also virtually the same color. Do you know? But we've got such different approaches to it that it makes them both very, very different. So.
And then the third category is ancient crops, and ancient crops are crops that have been cultivated for hundreds or thousands of years. And there are many examples of this. Sorghum, this is farro wheat, barley, cowpeas, nuts. And they also include foods cultivated, gathered, and selected by indigenous people. So this is a good example of an ancient crop. They believe it's been cultivated for about 10,000 years.
Again, this is a really interesting thing, because from an artist's point of view, this shows us wheat in a way that we're not expecting to see, because we're showing it close up, because it's such a stunning composition, and it's so striking and so graphic, but also I think very cleverly it shows, if you look at the small yellow stamens hanging out. So this is actually showing us the wheat in flower with those stamens hanging out, and such a striking image. And I think for some plants, it's really worth having a think about, can you, particularly if it's something you're very interested in, is can you show that plant? If it's a plant that everyone knows what wheat is, but if you can show it in an unusual way, then again, that makes it so much more exciting to get started on the conversation and to get going. That is a stunning image. Sorry. I like that.
And Susan Minton grew this in 4 different locations and ended up with only one producing the way she wanted it to. So she really hedged her bets, and it paid off. And I just wanted to talk about this briefly, because this is not from Abundant Future, but this is Jillian Condi's painting of some, what she calls fruits of the Kalahari. And these are all crop wild relatives that occur in the desert there. The one I'll talk about mostly is this melon here. And this melon is a food crop that was foraged. So people that were moving through the desert, thousands of years ago, would forage this. And it has flesh in there, but it also holds about 90% of its volume is water. So it was a very important food crop for the San people that were traveling through the desert. And then in addition to foraging it, they did cultivate it as well. And most recently, scientists are using this to hybridize with the watermelons that we all eat to try to protect it against various pests. So in specific, this one is used to protect against whiteflies. So they're working with this wild relative in order to impart new characteristics to a fruit that we're all very familiar with.
And again, a great composition there. Just showing all.
Sorry.
No, I was just saying it's fine. Just I gotta say, just showing a whole range of shapes, a whole range of colors. So it's visually interesting. It's got the plant growing with the flower showing, and so it's got all those sorts of things that you want to start a conversation like that, which I think works very well. Yeah,
And each of those cucumbers also tells their own story too. It's beautifully painted.
Mm.
And I just wanted to show this quickly, my painting of vanilla, because there was a lot I didn't know about vanilla. I learned about its history. However, I don't know its hybridization track and whether there are cultivars or whether it is all essentially plants that have been selected from the wild plant species. So originally it was all wild plant species, but over the time that it existed in Mexico in pre-Columbian times, the local people that cultivated it probably selected for better plants. So it's probably been cultivated and selected for thousands of years. The plant I found was, it was in two places. At the Huntington Botanical Garden, I found the flowers and the fruit, and then the vine itself at the New York Botanical Garden. So the origin of this is actually rather amorphous, and I believe that it is an ancient crop, but I can't really prove that.
But a great composition just on that, in terms of, go back down. Just in terms of its is fine. In terms of showing just green, that's just, you've literally done a green, the whole thing's green, and it's fascinating. It's great. It's something to interest. We've got a great focal point. You've got green pods hidden in there that you can look as your eye moves around. So really good focus. And again, really good story, because and a really good choice of subject, because vanilla, we all know of vanilla ice cream, vanilla flavoring for things, but the story of what vanilla came from originally, what it is, that's not something that people are going to be very aware of. So you've taken something quite common, commonly known, but most people would not know. So from an exhibition point of view, putting together an exhibition, that would work very well. Sorry, next one.
So this is a painting of, I think there are 11 varieties that were revived after being not grown for 100 years. These were in a seed bank in Korea. And I wanted to show this because of the composition, how she has laid out each of the varieties at the bottom to show the differences in the color and in the length of the awns. And then she's got that beautiful sort of cornucopia-like bunch sheath in the middle, which is such a visual center. And the painting is very, very big. It's a real showstopper in the show.
I saw that and was just applauding virtually, because you've got something that, to be blunt, is not very interesting as a subject. If you just have the center things, that's nice, but there's a limit. But she's made that a really interesting image, a really interesting painting. She worked really hard as an artist to make that, a stunning conversation piece to talk about. And we can all see, looking at it instantly, what she means by diversity. Because it's visual, isn't it? And it's all that diversity is there straight away. No, that's very clever. That's again, please, I hope we're going to get pictures that show this amount of thought going into the image, because that would be exciting too.
And then this is, I want to show this as an example. First of all, it's a naturalistic composition, but also she's included all these details at the bottom. And it's coffee, which everybody knows about, and it's one of the most valuable crops in the world. But in Ethiopia, they have all these local farms that have been in families for generations, and each of them has just a few apple trees, and they cultivate, they kind of
You coffee
grow.
trees, you mean?
Pardon?
You said apple, do you mean coffee?
Oh, did I say apple?
You did,
The
you meant coffee though. Yeah. So each
I've got
farm has a
apples
few
on the
coffee.
brain.
I know.
Yeah,
Each
so
farm has a few coffee.
they're grown on these small, individual holdings, and each family has their own varieties that they've been growing for generations. So the diversity there is really incredible. And Sarah Howard went to Ethiopia to study these on one of the coffee farms there.
And I think, Jenny, this really, your earlier question, Jenny, that you were asking about unnamed varieties, I think that is perfectly the answer about each farm having their own few bushes and things. I think that's what you were after, Jenny. I think that's what you meant. And I think this also is a good place to mention parishes. Yes, thought it was, Jenny. And also this is an excellent way to bring up Parish's point, which was about the GI tag meant plants with geographical indication certification, which is kind of an intellectual property right granted to any property or crops. But effectively what you're saying is a crop grown in a specific location. So I'm assuming that's very much like the way that they do wine from certain regions. So Champagne is from the Champagne region in France and that sort of thing. Otherwise it's sparkling wine or Prosecco. I would say the geographical indication certification, I think it's a good point if you can cover that point of what it means and why that makes that particular plant important for being grown in that area, and why so you're telling a story of that area just by painting that plant. So I think that would be a good idea, but do check with your local country's organizing committee on that. But I would say that was a good point.
Yeah, that does seem to fit there too. So then one other category, I think this is the last category, utilitarian heritage. We do allow utilitarian plants.
Mm-hmm.
We would prefer that they are cultivated as a crop. Mm-hmm. And this is a good example of that. It's cotton, and that is grown in the US, and some of it originates in the US and some originates I think it's in the Middle East. This is an old crop. It's 10,000 years old, I think it's been grown, and it's not responsible for much of the cotton that we wear. So it's a good example of a utilitarian heritage plant.
So I've got a question on the utilitarian question, which is came in from Sandra. Sandra, thank you. And she was talking about wanting to illustrate Quercus robur, which is a quintessentially English tree grown for its timber, which is a utilitarian reason. I know that there are currently moves within the forestry industry to select acorns from certain stands of oaks, to give perhaps a straighter trunk that would be better for timber reasons. I don't know. How would you feel about that, Carol? Would you, from my point of view, if it's a very competitive exhibition in terms of choosing it, and if you're trying to be in that top 40, I can think of better plants to use that would tell a quicker story. what would you go with that on, Carol? You know, because
I think,
trees.
yeah, I think that we didn't get any trees in our exhibition. We may get some because, as we all know, trees are used for
Mhm.
housing, for all kinds of things. You know, what we've always said to our artists, and this will vary by country, is that we mainly want it focused on edible crops.
Mhm.
But we have a smattering of utilitarian plants. We have a raffia painting in the show too.
Mhm.
And, you know, that is also a utilitarian plant.
Yeah.
It can broaden the story out a little bit,
Sure.
but
I know I was a bit sort of, I wasn't sure on that sort of thing. I can think that, for example, there's been a resurgence in the use of flax in Britain, and using flax, and that would be a way in terms of to go down that utilitarian thing. And there are some local arts projects where they're doing flax to try and make like a sort of cottage industry, and how they're going about that. And I think that's quite a good one. And I did also see, which I do want to mention, for example, in terms of specific geographic areas, in Cornwall, they're doing a naked oat project. So there's a particular type of oats that they grow very much in Cornwall. And Sheffield are doing an arts project where they're doing a land race of wheat, and they're trying to create Sheffield landrace. And so that talks about the issue of having a landrace is a crop. So say it's wheat, but it has quite a varied different genetic, well, a lot of genetic variation within the crop. So you sow the whole thing. It's not like a cultivar, you sow the whole thing. And then because there's such a varied genetic diversity within what you've sown, something will grow and you will get a crop. So if you get a bad year for a mildew, then all those ones that are resistant to that mildew will be fine, but the ones that are susceptible will die off. And so the landrace is a way of making it easier to get something rather than everything failing. So just wanted to mention those two things. And then I also had one from Sue, hello Sue, who does seaweeds. And this was really interesting point, because seaweeds are very much a foraged thing, although in some places, I think in some countries, it's actually grown as a crop and harvested, and there's particular ways of growing it. But the particular type that Sue was thinking of was a red algae. I was like, oh, okay. And then she started explaining that it was used in something called lava bread, which is a particular Welsh speciality. And that's when it suddenly has a story and suddenly becomes interesting, and suddenly makes a better story behind doing the image. So I actually thought that an algae that you're going to paint and that fits into a traditional food stuff of traditional bread like lava bread, I think would be appropriate under the ancient theme. So that was my questions.
okay, I'm going to just show these last two slides. This is a video we have on our YouTube channel in which 4 different scientists talk about crop diversity from their angles. One talks about wild grapes, one is a farmer, and they're so fascinating, and each of them illustrates a part of crop diversity. So you can either find it with this link or just go to our YouTube channel, which is Botanical Art by ASBA. And then for more resources, we have this Association of Botanical Artists.com/BAWW-2025. And that is the Association of Botanical Artists web location.
Yeah, that's our
All
website.
their
So
information.
Yeah, and we've got an artist pack that's downloadable. Anyone can download about that, but that is applicable only to the British exhibition.
And then that Botanical Art Worldwide website that I shared before, that's the web address for that, botanicalartworldwide.info. The World Crop Trust, croptrust.org, and then all of these paintings that were in our exhibition, there's 42 of them in total, I believe. Each has a story behind it, and that can be found on our website too, asba-art.org, Abundant Future. So if you want to immerse yourself in some of those stories, they're all there.
I would recommend everyone have a look at the Abundant Future, particularly because there's a page where you can just see thumbnails of all the images, and that gives you a really good idea of an overview of a really interesting exhibition that's telling good stories. And so you can see about the sort of compositions that they've got and that they've used, the sort of plants that they've used to tell those stories. And you can also see kind of, which ones that suit your style. And so you can look at different styles or different ideas that might help you with the way that you paint. I always like with an exhibition, I always love to see the paintings that I can't do. Do you know? It's those things that you can't, the complicated ones with lots of many things and many layered things, which I can't do, and I know I can't do, and that's fine, and I'm fine about that, but I love to see what I can't do. It's very exciting. Before you pop in, Elaine, there's a couple more questions I just want to mention.
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah, to Paresh. He's just said that there are many crops in India which have received this geographical area tag, and they're produced in small amounts. So I love the idea of a Gucci mushroom. I'm picturing it as a little bag. A Gucci mushroom from Kashmir and Cucurma longa from West Bengal State. That would be brilliant to me. To me, that is, from my point of view, in another country, that is exactly what I want to see. Exactly. I want to see an exhibition that showcases what I don't know about another country. Do you know, I want to be excited and amazed and also educated.
You would have to check with your country that they are going to include fungi.
Oh yes, yes.
Because in our British one we are, but that may not be the case everywhere.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good point as well in terms of choosing a subject is to, if you're not sure, do check with your organising committee.
And one last question from Gwenda asks about medicinal plants. They are on our list in the UK. And obviously very important, but you'd have to have a really good background story as to when they were cultivated and if they've been modified and whether you're going for the, a particular cultivar, I would have thought. What do you think, Carol?
Medicinal plants are difficult because some of them have been wild collected and are used as sort of folk remedies, and some are cultivated for pharmaceuticals. They're quite difficult, and I would say that in our case anyway, we would look at each entry individually and see if we thought it was, the story should be told.
If there's one thing that's come through from the discussion is that the issue is the story. You've got to have, we're assuming you have the skills as the artist and on all those thought processes. So we really want to see a very thoughtful choice of plant, that gives us a good story that we can talk about. So for example, if you're thinking about your choice of plant, you've listened to Carol talking about other artists and their plants, and being able to tell those stories so interestingly and so excitingly, you want that for yours as well.
Yeah.
You want anyone to be able to pick it up and say, oh, but did you see what they did, and did you see the image, and did you see the story behind it? And also from the overall thinking in terms of the exhibition from each country, you want to be able to showcase your country, you know, show that range to be proud of. I hope we're going to be able to do that in Britain, Elaine. Go on.
So do I. But I am going to close this now. I think it's been absolutely fascinating. I really do. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I've had a load of really good questions. Paresh, I think we can come, I think hopefully we've answered that last question on medicinal plants.
Yeah.
I wanted to thank you, both Carol and Martin, for going over the information which is relevant, I think, to all artists that are considering taking part in this. And I think what came out for me was think about something where you can really be solid in your story. Because otherwise it might be tenuous and judges may say. So thank you both. It's been really, really useful.
If there's two paintings of equal artistic merit and one has a really good story,
which one are you going to choose?
There's a choice, you know.
Yeah, it's hard life, but that's what happens.
Good
So this video, so thank you very much, Carol, for coming in from America, and thank you, Martin, as usual, for being a wonderful chat host. And thank you all for coming and for putting in your incredibly good questions. We've had people from all over the world, and that's really lovely. That's what ABBA's about. So the video of this webinar will be uploaded onto the ABBA YouTube channel for everyone to access. And we will make sure that the link to that gets out there.
Yeah, and I think we're going to try and put those links that Carol mentioned at the end of the thing just down below underneath the YouTube thing, if we can.
Well, that's over to our video editor.
Our video editor behind the scenes, bless him.
Thank you very much, Alan. Okay, well, thank you both very much. And I'll say good night here, good afternoon there, good morning somewhere else. It's confusing. All right, bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.